John Miller's ranch stretched over 100 acres of rolling hills, wildflowers, and ancient oak trees, a place untouched by time and civilization's ceaseless push. This was more than land to him, it was legacy, a gift passed down through generations, a sanctuary where he could breathe free away from city noise and neighbors who never understood the peace he craved. Each morning, John walked the boundary lines, feeling the earth beneath his boots, listening to the chorus of birds, welcoming the dawn. The ranch was his refuge, the one place he controlled entirely. But on one seemingly ordinary afternoon, that sanctuary cracked. The mail carrier handed John a thick envelope, its official seal instantly setting off alarms in his gut. The return address? The Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. John barely gave the HOA a second thought. He wasn't part of the gated neighborhood 3 miles away. His ranch was miles outside HOA jurisdiction, miles away from suburban rules and petty disputes. Yet here it was, demanding his attention. With a sinking feeling, John tore the envelope open. The letter inside was cold, legalistic, and unforgiving. It stated in no uncertain terms that a portion of John's ranch, over 20 acres according to a recently updated boundary survey, was considered HOA property. Worse, the HOA claimed the right to regulate and maintain that portion, charging fees and restricting use. John blinked at the words, disbelief swirling in his mind. "There must be some mistake," he murmured. His eyes scanned the letter again, searching for a loophole, a clerical error, anything that would explain this bizarre claim. But the letter was clear. It referenced a community benefit clause buried deep in HOA bylaws and implied that John had allowed the community access for years, something John had never knowingly done. His heart pounded. How could they just take his land? His private ranch? The thought felt like a betrayal. John immediately grabbed the old deed papers stored in his study, the yellowed maps his grandfather had drawn with precise lines marking every corner of the property. Every inch of that land was his. He had proof. Yet as he spread the papers on the worn oak table, doubt crept in. The boundary lines on the HOA's survey didn't quite match his maps. A thin strip of land seemed to be claimed by both sides. A contested sliver of earth, small but significant. John's mind raced. Was this an honest error or something more sinister? Could the HOA be trying to grab more than their fair share? He remembered hearing rumors of HOA power grabs in nearby towns, aggressive, overreaching, crushing dissent. The ranch felt suddenly vulnerable. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, John sat, outside with a mug of coffee, staring at the distant property line. The quiet he'd known all his life was shattered by the uncertainty now hanging over his home. In the darkness, a whisper of doubt became a roar. Could he lose what his family had protected for decades? John's fingers tightened around the mug. No, he wouldn't let that happen. Something told him this was just the beginning. The fight for his ranch was about to start, and the quiet sanctuary he loved might never be the same. John sat at his desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating a stack of HOA documents and bylaws. He had spent the last several hours combing through them, his eyes burning from the strain. The words blurred, but he was determined to understand the legal tangle threatening his ranch. At first glance, the HOA's claim seemed absurd. How could they justify ownership of a piece of land that had been in John's family for generations? But buried deep within the pages, he found something chilling, a hidden clause, tucked away in fine print in an old amendment to the HOA charter. It referred vaguely to common property rights and shared access easements, terms John barely understood but knew spelled trouble. The clause suggested that the HOA had the right to claim certain adjacent lands for community use, even if those lands were privately owned. It was like a legal loophole designed to snatch property under the guise of benefit to the community. John's pulse quickened. Had someone slipped this clause past residents years ago? Had his family unknowingly lost a portion of their land decades earlier? He called his attorney Lisa, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had helped him with minor legal matters before. "I've got a situation," John said. "The HOA's claiming part of my ranch based on a clause buried in their bylaws. It's like they want to control the land without actually owning it." Lisa agreed to review the documents immediately. "If this clause has any legal standing, it could be a serious problem," she warned. "We need to look into how it was passed, if it was disclosed properly, and whether it applies to your property." As the days passed, John grew restless. The peaceful routine of ranch life was replaced by tense phone calls, meetings, and trips to the county records office. He learned the HOA had updated their boundary survey using new technology, drones and GPS mapping, which apparently shifted the perceived property lines in their favor. But John's grandfather's maps, handwritten and dated, told a different story. The land he called home was unmistakably his. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating around town. Some locals whispered that the HOA board members were using the dispute as leverage to pressure residents into paying higher fees. Others suggested a developer had eyes on the ranch land for a new project, and the HOA was the first step in a bigger plan. John felt the walls closing in. His neighbors, once friendly, now eyed him with suspicion or avoided him altogether. A few even mentioned they were considering siding with the HOA, either out of fear or convenience. One evening, John sat on his porch, staring at the fading sunset when his phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message. "Give it up. The HOA always wins. Don't make this harder on yourself." The warning sent a chill down his spine. John wasn't just fighting a legal battle anymore. He was facing an unseen enemy with resources, influence, and possibly more to hide than he realized. He realized he had to act fast. Determined not to be outmaneuvered, John arranged for a professional land surveyor to conduct an independent assessment. He also began documenting everything meticulously: photos, videos, recorded conversations. If this escalated, he wanted undeniable proof to back his claim. At night, he pored over the HOA's bylaws again, looking for any flaws, any angle to, turn the tide. The hidden clause was a weapon, but he was convinced there had to be a counterattack. And as he dug deeper, John uncovered whispers of irregularities in how the HOA conducted its meetings and approved that suspicious amendment. Could the whole claim be invalid? The suspense weighed heavily on him. The peaceful ranch he loved was no longer just a piece of land. It was a battlefield. John clenched his jaw and made a silent vow. No matter how deep the conspiracy, no matter the cost, he would fight to protect his family's legacy. The next move was his. The once quiet neighborhood surrounding John's ranch had changed, subtly but unmistakably. The warm greetings and casual hellos that had filled John's walks along the dusty country road were replaced by clipped nods, averted gazes, and hushed conversations whenever he neared. John had always valued his privacy, but now that very isolation felt like a wedge driving through the community. The HOA's claim on his ranch had cast a shadow, and the neighbors' reactions stung more than he expected. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something had shifted beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was personal. One afternoon, John found himself at the local general store searching for supplies. The chatter was low, strained. Two neighbors, Claire and Mark, stood near the checkout, their voices dropping when they noticed him. "He's making things difficult," Claire whispered, casting a quick glance over her shoulder. Mark nodded, adding, "The HOA's just trying to keep things orderly. You can't just do whatever you want out here." John clenched his fists, swallowing his anger. He had tried to reach out to explain, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Later that day, while inspecting the fence line, John noticed fresh tire tracks crossing a narrow path at the edge of his property. A chill ran down his spine. Someone had been there recently. Without permission, he wasn't the only one who noticed the change. Neighbors who once sympathized had begun urging him to comply with the HOA's demands. They spoke of keeping the peace, avoiding costly legal battles, and not rocking the boat. John's frustration grew. Was the HOA turning his neighbors against him, or was something else at play? That evening, as dusk settled over the ranch, John received an unexpected visitor. It was Tom, a longtime neighbor and one of the few who had always stood by him. "John," Tom said quietly, "I need to warn you. There's talk going around. Some board members think you're a troublemaker. They don't want you here." John's brow furrowed. "Why would they want to push me out?" Tom hesitated, then leaned in. "It's more than just land. There are plans for that property. Developers have their eyes on it. The HOA's claim might be the first step to making it easier to sell off." The news hit John like a punch to the gut. His sanctuary wasn't just threatened by bureaucracy, it was caught in the crosshairs of a larger scheme. Days later, John's mailbox held an anonymous note, typed and unsigned, "Your fight is futile. Stop making enemies you can't afford." His heart pounded, and for the first time, fear crept in. Was someone watching, listening? John doubled down. He installed motion-activated lights and security cameras around the perimeter. Every shadow, every sound in the night now sparked heightened alertness. But the most painful blow was the growing distance between him and the community. Friends turned cold, neighbors whispered behind his back, and the line between ally and adversary blurred. During a community meeting, John stood up to speak, demanding answers and transparency. The room tensed, some applauded quietly, but many eyes turned hostile. The HOA president's calm, rehearsed responses did little to ease concerns. Afterwards, John learned that several neighbors had reported him to the board for disturbing the peace and harassment. The fight was no longer just about land. It was about trust, loyalty, and survival. That night, as he stared at the surveillance footage of the empty ranch, John realized he was facing a battle on multiple fronts. The HOA was one enemy, but the fractured community was another. He knew the coming days would test him like never before. John's private ranch, the last piece of his family's history, was now a war zone, and he was running out of time. The night air was thick and still, the kind of silence that pressed in on John like a warning. He sat in his living room, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Sleep was elusive, his mind replaying every legal document, every whispered threat, every wary glance from neighbors. Suddenly, the sharp flicker of motion on one of his security cameras snapped him to full alert. John grabbed his flashlight and slipped silently outside, his boots crunching on the gravel as he moved toward the perimeter. The camera feed showed dark figures moving stealthily near the disputed boundary line, the very edge the HOA claimed as theirs. "Who the hell are you?" John hissed under his breath, his voice barely more than a breath in the night. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing two figures crouched low, attempting to disable the camera. "Stop!" John shouted, stepping closer. The intruders froze, exchanging hurried whispers, then bolted toward the tree line. John's heart hammered as he raced after them, but the thick underbrush swallowed their tracks. The invaders disappeared like ghosts into the night. The next morning, John found the camera's wiring cut cleanly, a deliberate act of sabotage. He reported the break-in to the local sheriff's office, but the deputies seemed reluctant to get involved. "Unless there's clear evidence, it's a civil matter," the sheriff explained. "You might want to settle this through legal channels." John knew the legal battle was only part of the fight. Whoever had trespassed had crossed a line, literally and figuratively. That day, John tightened security around the ranch. He installed additional cameras with infrared night vision, reinforced the fences, and set up motion detectors connected to alarms. But the intrusion sent a cold warning. The HOA's claim wasn't just paper and words. It was backed by people willing to break the law. The tension in the neighborhood escalated. Rumors swirled that the HOA had hired private investigators, or worse, enforcers, to pressure John into compliance. One afternoon, John received an anonymous package on his porch, a small, weathered notebook with cryptic notes about the ranch's history, local land disputes, and a list of names. Some familiar, some not. Among the scribbles was a chilling message. "Leave now, or this will get worse." John's resolve hardened. This was war, and he wasn't backing down. Late that night, as he sat reviewing the notebook, John's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're not alone. Meet me at the old barn tomorrow at noon." Suspicion battled curiosity. Could this be a trap or a lifeline? The next day, John cautiously approached the weather-beaten barn on the far edge of his property. Inside, a shadowy figure stepped forward, a middle-aged woman with determined eyes. "I'm Rachel," she said quietly. "I've seen what the HOA's been up to. You need help." Rachel revealed she was a former HOA board member who had resigned after uncovering the association's questionable tactics. She handed John a folder filled with documents, emails, and photographs, proof of backdoor deals and forged signatures. John felt a spark of hope. He wasn't fighting blind anymore, but the knowledge came with a price. Rachel warned that exposing the truth would only deepen the conflict, and the HOA wouldn't stop until he was broken. That night, as John lay awake listening to the wind rustling through the trees, he realized the stakes had grown far beyond land ownership. This was a battle for truth, justice, and survival. John's quiet ranch was no longer a refuge. It was a fortress under siege. John's days became a whirlwind of planning and preparation. The peaceful rhythm of ranch life was shattered, replaced by a mission to make his land untouchable. With Rachel's documents in hand, John hired a team of professionals, a seasoned land surveyor to confirm the exact boundaries, a skilled attorney to challenge the HOA's dubious claims, and a security expert to design a fortress worthy of defending a legacy. The surveyor's report was a relief. The original property lines, drawn decades ago, held firm. The HOA's updated survey had glaring errors, some suspiciously convenient. John's legal team pounced on the inconsistencies, preparing to file a formal dispute. But John knew paper battles alone wouldn't stop determined trespassers. Together with the security expert, John mapped out a plan to turn the ranch into a near-impenetrable stronghold. They installed reinforced fencing, topped with razor wire in strategic areas hidden from view but deadly to any intruder. Motion sensor cameras were scattered around the perimeter, linked to his phone for instant alerts. John dug ditches along the most vulnerable stretches, some lined with thorny bushes and dense brambles, natural barriers designed to slow down any unwelcome visitors. His neighbors watched from a distance, whispers growing louder. Some admired his resolve. Others whispered he was escalating the conflict unnecessarily. Late one evening, as John stood surveying the freshly installed defenses, a car slowly rolled by on the nearby road. The headlights briefly illuminated his silhouette against the fences. The vehicle's engine revved before disappearing into the night. John's gut told him the HOA was watching. Tensions escalated when one morning John found several fence posts deliberately loosened. Someone had tried to sabotage his defenses. His frustration boiled over. This was no longer a simple property dispute. It was a war of attrition. John called a meeting with the few neighbors who still supported him. They formed a small alliance, sharing concerns and agreeing to keep watch on each other's properties. "We can't let them isolate you," said Tom, the longtime neighbor. "We stand together or fall alone." John was grateful but cautious. He knew loyalty in this fight was fragile. In the courtroom, the battle took unexpected turns. The HOA's lawyers argued that John's barricades were excessive and disruptive to the community's access rights. They demanded he remove some of the fences and barriers. John's attorney fought back fiercely, emphasizing the illegal trespassing and harassment John had endured. Meanwhile, John found himself the target of anonymous threats, late-night phone, calls filled with silence or ominous warnings. Sleep became a luxury. One night, John sat alone by the fire pit, staring into the flames as memories of his grandfather flooded back, the man who had built this ranch from nothing, who had fought his own battles to protect the land. John felt the weight of that legacy settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just defending property. He was defending family honor, a piece of history that no amount of intimidation could erase. The ranch was becoming untouchable, not just because of fences and cameras, but because John's spirit was unbreakable. As dawn broke over the hills, John made a silent vow. Come what may, he would hold his ground. The fight was far from over. The night before the big HOA meeting, John barely slept. The ranch's fences and cameras were ready, the legal paperwork stacked neatly on his desk, but his mind raced with what was to come. This meeting wasn't just a formality. It was a battlefield where words would become weapons. The community center buzzed with low murmurs as John stepped inside. The room was packed, neighbors, HOA board members, and curious onlookers filling every seat. The air was thick with tension. John's gaze scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Some looked resolute, others uncertain. A few avoided his eyes altogether. When the HOA president, Karen Mills, called the meeting to order, her voice was calm but commanding. "We're here to discuss the disputed property and the impact on our community," she began, her tone measured. John rose, feeling the weight of every eye on him. "This ranch has been in my family for generations," he said firmly. "The HOA's claim is based on questionable documents and a clause many residents weren't even aware of. I'm here to protect my land and my family's legacy." Karen's smile was tight, almost rehearsed. "Mr. Miller, the HOA has acted within its rights, following procedures outlined in our bylaws. This isn't personal. It's about the community's well-being." The room stirred. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably as the debate intensified. Accusations flew from both sides. John challenged the legitimacy of the HOA's boundary survey and the obscure amendment that gave them control. The board defended their stance, emphasizing shared access and community benefits. Then, just when it seemed the meeting might descend into chaos, a voice interrupted from the back. "I have something to share," said Rachel, the former board member John had met in the barn. She stepped forward, clutching a thick envelope. The room fell silent. Rachel laid out documents and emails she had collected, proof of forged signatures on HOA meeting minutes, hush-hush communications planning the land grab, and even threats made to residents who opposed the board. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face paled. "These are baseless accusations," she snapped, but the damage was done. John felt a surge of hope but kept his guard up. This was a turning point, but the fight wasn't over. As the meeting adjourned, a small group approached John, expressing support. But one man lingered in the shadows. Mark, the neighbor who had once sided with the HOA. His smile was thin and his eyes cold. "Be careful, John," Mark warned softly. "You're poking a bear." John nodded, sensing there were still many battles ahead. Outside, as the sun set, John's phone buzzed. A text appeared. "You've stirred the hornet's nest. Watch your back." The confrontation had exposed cracks in the HOA's armor, but it had also revealed deeper dangers lurking beneath the surface. John realized that the fight for his ranch wasn't just about property rights anymore. It was about exposing corruption, reclaiming truth, and standing strong against those who wielded power without conscience. The final showdown was approaching, and John was ready. Days after the explosive HOA meeting, the atmosphere around John's ranch grew tense, almost electric. The neighborhood was divided. Whispers of support clashed with murmurs of suspicion. John knew he had shaken the community to its core, but the battle was far from over. Late one afternoon, John received a call from Lisa, his attorney. Her voice was urgent. "John, I've reviewed the HOA's documents and the evidence Rachel provided. There's enough to file a formal lawsuit for fraud and property rights violations. But you need to be prepared or this will get messy." John nodded, steeling himself. He knew the stakes had just skyrocketed. In the days that followed, John and Lisa worked tirelessly, drafting legal papers, gathering witness statements, and preparing for the courtroom war ahead. But outside the legal battlefield, John faced new challenges. One evening, while walking his dog near the disputed boundary, John spotted a drone hovering silently above the trees. Its red light blinked ominously as it scanned the property. "Who's spying on me now?" John muttered, anger and unease bubbling up. He reported the drone to the sheriff's department, but officials shrugged it off as a privacy concern rather than a criminal matter. Frustrated but undeterred, John expanded his surveillance system. He began tracking patterns, vehicles driving slowly by at odd hours, unfamiliar faces lurking near his fences. Then came the anonymous letters, thinly veiled threats warning him to drop the lawsuit or face consequences. Each note was more sinister than the last, leaving John wondering how deep the conspiracy went. But John refused to be intimidated. Instead, he used the threats to fuel his determination. He reached out to a local journalist known for exposing corruption, hoping to bring public attention to the HOA's shadowy dealings. The reporter, Claire, listened carefully to John's story and agreed to investigate. Soon, articles began appearing online, shining a harsh light on the HOA board's questionable tactics and the land dispute. Public pressure mounted, and some neighbors who had once stayed silent started speaking, out in John's favor. The tide was turning. Then, one night, John's surveillance cameras captured a shocking scene. Several HOA board members meeting in secret near the disputed land, discussing plans to escalate their claim and possibly intimidate John further. Armed. With the footage, John confronted the board at their next public meeting. The evidence was undeniable. The room erupted in accusations and denials, but the damage to the HOA's credibility was done. As the lawsuit moved forward, John felt a cautious optimism. The fight was still grueling, but now he had allies and momentum. Yet, beneath the surface, John sensed a final challenge looming, something the HOA wouldn't reveal until the last possible moment. One evening, as John was locking up the barn, a voice called from the darkness. "You're making a mistake," it said softly. John turned to see an unfamiliar man stepping into the light. His expression was grave, his eyes sharp. "There's more at stake here than you realize," the stranger warned. "They're not just after the land. They want to bury the truth." John's heart pounded. The turning point had arrived. John stared at the stranger, the weight of his words sinking in like a cold wave. "What truth?" he demanded. The man hesitated, then pulled out a worn envelope, handing it to John. "Evidence. Proof that the HOA's claim was never about the land. It's about covering up a decades-old scandal, something that could ruin powerful people in this town." John's mind raced as he tore open the envelope. Inside were faded photographs, old letters, and a ledger filled with names and sums of money. A paper trail of corruption, bribery, and cover-ups linked to the HOA's founding members. "This is explosive," John whispered. The stranger nodded. "You're being targeted because you stumbled onto this secret. They want to silence you." Fear and determination battled within John. He'd already lost friends, faced threats, and seen his peaceful life turned upside down. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. He called Lisa and Rachel, sharing the new evidence. Together, they formulated a plan, not just to defend the ranch, but to expose the entire network of deceit. The next day, John held a press conference with Claire, the investigative journalist. Cameras flashed as he revealed the documents and his story of harassment, intimidation, and relentless pursuit of the truth. Public outcry was immediate and fierce. Authorities launched investigations, and the HOA board members faced inquiries into their conduct and the legitimacy of their claims. In court, the judge ruled in John's favor, invalidating the HOA's claim to his ranch based on fraud and procedural violations. The court also ordered a full audit of the HOA's operations, but the true victory was deeper. John's ranch was untouchable, protected not just by fences and cameras, but by truth and community support. Neighbors who had turned against him apologized, and slowly bridges began to rebuild. One evening, as John sat on his porch watching the sunset, Rachel joined him. "You did what no one else could," she said quietly. "You made the ranch untouchable." John smiled, the weight of the battle finally lifting. "It was never just about the land," he said. "It was about standing up for what's right." As the stars emerged, John felt a profound peace. His family's legacy was safe and stronger than ever. The HOA's shadow had been lifted, replaced by light and justice. John knew the fight had changed him, but it had also shown him the power of courage, resilience, and truth. His ranch would remain a sanctuary, not just on paper but in spirit, and no one would ever take that away.